Tom, cheers. There you go. Afternoon, everyone. We got David and David T. Smith and Aaron Knoll talking about the gin trends for 2020 and beyond. David's decided we need some intro music, and I don't think he realises we can't really hear it very well. So we're going to open up the Q&A for everyone. It's open, ready for you. So please fire away, give us some questions.
It's time for Gin School.
First, let's have a recap from David and Aaron on their talk. Hopefully, you've all watched it, and yeah, please send us some questions.
Aaron, do you want to start?
Well, delighted to be here, everyone. Hope everyone's doing well. You know, I mean, 2020 has been a pretty wild year in terms of the trends and everything. And I mean, I think we see and already seeing pretty dramatic changes brought on by perhaps outside factors, perhaps by changes that are just happening naturally, right? You know, seeing dramatic changes in terms of how people are looking at non-alcoholic, low ABV cocktails. I'm really curious to see how this winter's trends hold up. I mean, I'd say, like, you know, if you listen to the talk, I'm really excited to dig into the data this year, at the end of this year, and kind of look at where we've gone, just because so much, you know, has changed. I think the one thing's clear: people are still enjoying gin. They're enjoying it at home. People are going out and enjoying where they can. But I mean, I think gin stands to be in a good place. I'm just really curious to see where things are going, and kind of what we've seen so far is just that change is happening. And you know, anyway, that's the looking forward to 2021 part.
Well, that's the thing. I think can we do a poll, Joe? Is that all right?
We can do a poll. What would
Let's, because I think one of the things that we talked briefly about, and it's not quite gin, but it's gin related, is the no and low. And so my question would be for the poll: is no and low here to stay, or a flash in the pan? So that's the vote now. Well, in a second when the poll's up, but yeah. Yeah, I was thinking, I was actually writing a column about what 2021 got, what's coming ahead for 2021. And I was thinking, well, I think a lot of this virtual stuff is going to be here to stay in some way or another. I think the interesting challenge will be, how do we do a hybrid of physical and virtual? That will be much more difficult than doing just one or the other, I think. We did a gin class on Monday, and we had two people from Canada, someone from Texas, someone from Ecuador, someone from Australia, someone from Russia, someone from Armenia, a chunk of people from the UK and Ireland. So such a range of different people. So it shows to me that there's still a lot of growth for gin around the world, for sure. But how great, like, you know, to do a talk with all these different people. No one had to fly anywhere. Thousands and thousands of tens of thousands of dollars probably saved in transport and stuff. But I think they got a lot out of it, and we still managed to have quite a good conversation and really get into the nitty gritty of making gin. So there's a slightly broader thing, but that's what I've been thinking this week.
Yeah, I mean, and I think that builds really strongly off a trend we've been seeing kind of in who's been drinking gin, who's been looking for gin lately, right? And perhaps this is an opportunity to kind of accelerate gin's growth in corners of the world where maybe there isn't an established gin scene, right? We have an opportunity to talk to people in places that, you know, don't have regular distilling conferences, you know. So I think that's that might be one of the really interesting things. You know, we've seen so much growth in Asia and Africa in terms of interest in gin. Those are huge markets and huge opportunities and huge places, you know, for growth and interest in distilling. So maybe we're going to see, maybe this will help accelerate kind of the sharing of knowledge across these international boundaries, right?
Mm. And I think with that, you have some stuff people are trying to do something relatively classic, but with a little local twist. And I, for one, am very much looking forward to tasting these things.
I mean, same here. I've been really excited by nearly everything I've had, especially when you're trying things like, I think Nam Gin, I think that one's out of Namibia. They're distilling a base spirit from dates, and that is something that's kind of traditional to the area. Like these little things that we just haven't seen in celebrations of local traditions are really exciting to me, you know, as someone who's watching kind of gin and where it's going. So this knowledge sharing leads to huge opportunities for new tastes and new flavor profiles we really maybe haven't had exactly, right? You know, I don't think 10 years ago, people in the gin community would know what wattle seed distilled in a spirit tastes like. But now we're like, oh, I'm getting wattle seed. You get wattle seed notes like in your aquavits and stuff too. Like it's not obviously wattle seed, but you know what I mean, right?
A touch of tonka bean.
Yeah.
So I'm going to throw out a question, and it's quite a good one. Gin and Coke. Your thoughts, please.
Aaron?
Well, I mean, I'll admit that I believe on my Instagram last night I posted a picture of gin and Coke. So gin and Coke, right? I think, you know, it is a mixing tradition that has existed, especially here stateside, just not as visible in the, you know, in the bars and the entrees, the places where gin consumption has been particularly clear. Like it's the kind of thing that's happening in dive bars. It's the kind of thing that's happening in backyards. The fact that it's now entering the mainstream is an opportunity to really celebrate it, right? Like gin, Coke, cola, the accord of botanicals in cola. Cola is a botanical soda. It's the same botanicals that we often have in gin: coriander, nutmeg, citrus. I really enjoy it, and I like it as a counterpoint to spice forward gins like the Bobby's dry gin I found in the back of my cabinet, and I was real excited to mix with Coke last night. I know you're a big fan.
David is a big fan of gin and Coke. So
I am a big. We had some. I found some old Seagram's Distillers Reserve, so I was enjoying some of that the other night, which was quite nice.
Worked for Pepsi Max, I believe.
Those slight barrely notes that it had. So, no, I'm a big fan. At least from the 30s, the Southern exposure, which sounds like something that might happen if Aaron stood up if he still got his pajamas on.
Wait, you don't like the botanical shirt here?
It's a lovely shirt. Sorry,
I go to sleep with my my juniper, my sprig on all the time, right?
I've got the wrong waistcoat on. Sorry, Nicholas. Yeah, no, I think it's gaining momentum. And even like in the last year, when you speak to people about it, they used to just be like, "What, really?" And now people gradually a bit of momentum, and people are going, "Okay, yeah." I mean, and I think that's good. I mean, the idea that it would thank you. It hides the flavors or whatever. I mean, so does tonic. Tonic's got sugar and citric acid and quinine, like one of the most bitter things. Like,
right?
Yeah, and Negroni, the same thing,
well, right? Because the flavored gins tend to work quite well with a Coke, right? We tried it with various different things, and you've managed to get a different experience from it, I'd probably say.
Just a quick plug.
A poll out.
This book, by the way.
Very good book there. I like it.
Just another little quick plug for Aaron there.
Yeah, if you want to like geek out about all of the trends that we uncovered last year, and also, you know, what a preview. Currently, we are just gearing up to work on getting the statistics ready for 2021. So dig into 2020 while it's still fresh. There'll be a new one coming out very early next year.
With a snappier name, yeah.
You're telling me
consumer and taste preferences in gin and botanical spirits.
So
yeah.
Gin trends. You can have it for free. Gin trends. Gin trends 2021. My gift to you.
I put a poll out for that, and I'm just going to publish the results. Unfortunately, no one is a fan, apparently, watching of the gin and Coke. People were very not a chance or meh.
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 What were the numbers?
Right,
what were the numbers?
Well, this is my pitch. I know a lot of people are a little skeptical, but my suggestion to you is don't start with Coke or Pepsi. Like those are like, they're a little cloying, they're a little overpowering. Try it with there's now a range of colas out there. Like Q Cola is my favorite. It's a little bit more botanically driven. It's less sweet, and it gives space for the gin to come through. If you haven't tried that, my suggestion might be just give it a chance, because I think a lot of the colas we're kind of mixing with just really were never designed to give space to a spirit. Just like, craft, some of these smaller scale tonic waters dialed down the sugar, dialed down the quinine, dialed down the citric acid, and gave your gin a chance to kind of come through in the cocktail, so you weren't just drinking tonic water. But I hear the skepticism, but give it one more try, and then vote meh.
I agree. I think there's a lot of potential to gin and cola, and there's many different cola brands. And a lot of people are doing more of a craft cola now, so it definitely there's a variety. You haven't got to stick with Coke or Pepsi, and we did say previously it's not gin, is it, Dave? But with Coke and Pepsi and a certain whiskey brand, and depending on what whiskey we had from them, it worked with cola or it worked with Pepsi, but it didn't work with the other. So if it worked with cola or for Pepsi, it worked with Pepsi, don't drink it with cola.
Quite incredible. And most of the variation was just the taste. Was the ABV. There was a lot of what the variation was. So yeah, it was really genuinely very, very surprised. Also, I would put some some effort behind it. Do it in a nice glass with lots of ice and orange or something like that. It's lovely. I think Bombay Sapphire works particularly well as an entry. I think that was the first gin and coke I ever tasted. But there's a lot of other ones as well.
So I'm going to follow that up now with another, not so much a question, more of a statement for our very own Bernadette Hampton. Negroni and Coke, though, also known as the Negroni River, I believe.
Oh, you're talking about a Negroni with a like a Coke chaser. Yes. Well,
Coke
also very nice. So okay, but we should move on.
Yeah, we'll move on. We've got some serious questions now. So Michael said, it seems like gins. Oh, sorry, I've just archived it. Bear with me 2 seconds. It seems like gins from newcomer countries like Ecuador, Brazil, Japan produce gin direct for the international market.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean,
What's the question?
Yeah, I mean, and I think that makes smart business sense, at least, especially as in places where you don't have a strong gin drinking culture or an evolving gin drinking culture. However, so while that might be true in Ecuador, I would kind of, if you're looking at the Asian markets, I would challenge you to also look inward, look locally, because the interest I see, and especially a lot of Asian countries, is there is an immense amount. And when I say Asian countries, I'm speaking very broadly, like Pan-Asia. Like I'm seeing huge growth in India, Japan, China, the Philippines, beyond just San Miguel, right? It is really a regional movement, and there is a lot of local appetite. I'm not sure I've seen the local appetite in South America kind of reach to where it might be in Asia, but I think that, but I think that's also important. If the local market is where you're going to see a lot of opportunities and growth. So I would say, education was a barrier to the American market in 2006 when Distillers first launched their gin. So don't rule it out just because the level of discourse isn't to, people aren't talking about the same way they are in the UK,
South America, mostly I know Peru best, but a brand from there, they're kind of doing a combination of domestic and international. Sometimes part of the international thing is like some of the kudos to being further out and things like that. But some of the but domestically, I know, like in Peru, for example, it's not so much about gin and tonic. I think it's gin and ginger ale seems to be one of the more popular mixes. So it's also about having a little bit of understanding about how the local market drinks it. I don't know, Julia, if you're on the chat. I know in Lebanon, it's I want to say, is it like the mint smash or something like that they drink way more of than like a gin and tonic or anything? If Julia's here, maybe she can let us know. But yeah, I take the point, but I think there is a combination, and a smart distiller will do both. And that's part of the reason why a lot of these distillers want to capture something of the sense of place in their gin for the domestic market, but also for the people that visited the country or expats or something like that outside.
So we've got another good question here. What's your opinion on RTD cocktails? Sorry, it was the Basil Smash Day.
Basil Smash. Thank you, Julia.
Basil Smash. Yeah, so what's your opinion on RTD cocktails? Signs of being a trending thing for 2021. I mean, I'd arguably say it's already a trend.
I would agree.
Same here. Yeah, I mean, I think that it is very clearly a trend at the moment, and I think that, I think it's a really great opportunity to get gin in front of people who, in contexts where they aren't normally able to enjoy a spirit, right? At the beach, you bring cans of something. You usually don't bring a bottle and mix some craft cocktail. Some people do. I used to do that, but I mean, I think it helps get your product into places where you wouldn't normally have people drinking gin, but there is a latent desire to do it. I do kind of caution that, it's a trend at the moment, almost bordering on fad. The market is quickly becoming inundated, and with people spending more time perhaps not going to the beach and stuff, like this does have a risk of kind of being a fad, or it does have a risk of being a backlash against it. I think that might be, at least stateside, where we don't have a long tradition like you do in the European market of RTDs being all readily available. I think that's something we might be seeing the beginnings of. I wouldn't say authoritatively, but I do kind of see that. I do kind of see we're at the risk of, is it fad or sustainable? I'm a little worried we're leaning a little more towards fad at the moment.
It's interesting. As I would probably go a little bit the other way. But then, like you said, there's so different rules about drinking in public and things like that in the UK and Europe, as opposed to. What I have seen is a lot more innovation. So I just nipped over to the fridge to pick up some products that I picked up recently. This one, which is a passion fruit and coconut gin with pineapple juice, which to me sounds a bit like a Gina Colada. And then also this one, this is very new. This is number 3's Vesper Martini. So this is a different type of RTD. This is a bottled cocktail. So designed to either be chilled and then just served straight into a glass, or with ice and shaken or whatever. Whereas this is, you drink it straight from the can. And they're these two different levels. And I think they both have some potential. I think for the smaller distiller, probably the bottled, the actual, like the bottled, what I call bottled cocktails, I think that has a lot more potential because you haven't got to worry about carbonation and canning and all these kind of things. But like doing a barrel aged Negroni or a chocolate Negroni or something like that in a small 100ml bottle, I think there's a lot of potential to do something like that. Good value added, could be some quite nice profit margins on that as well.
Right, but the price point, and generally we've kind of seen in the American market, is a little bit high to almost be prohibitive, right? Like, there are some very high quality pre-bottled, Manhattans out there, as one I'm thinking of in particular, and it just comes in at a price point that's almost, it's a little bit harder for the consumer to justify, especially when you can get a bottle of, vermouth and mixing bourbon for a little bit lower of a price. I think that's, and I don't point out that example to be cynical, just to, like, this is, I think, one of the real challenges when the costs of developing, producing, bottling something like this tends to come out higher than, just kind of like mixing and making one at home. So how do you kind of overcome that? Like, is it a combination of marketing, social media, education, direct to the consumer sales, combination of all of the above?
It's a really good point. And I think the answer to it is you have to do something that the consumer can't do at home. So you do the barrel-aged Negroni, you do the Negroni that uses Campari that's infused with cocoa nibs or something. You're doing some value-added thing that you couldn't just make it at home. I think that's what you do.
Yeah, I love when you finish my thought. That's exactly where I was going, and it's like, we didn't coordinate this. It's just like Dave picks it up and just carries it all the way. That's exactly. Yeah. No. Like, this is like, we couldn't have staged it better.
I mean, the other argument is it's ease, isn't it? RTD cocktails. I mean, who's going to want to carry around, like you said, about taking it to the beach, taking a big bottle of gin, taking a couple of bottles of tonic to go with the gin, getting it also the right temperature, whereas you can chill 6 or 7 pre-canned gin and tonics, throw them in a cooler, go down the beach, and you could be there all day and you'll still be happy by the end of it because you've had a reasonable experience with it. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but it's good, and it's at the right temperature, and you've not had to lug around big glass bottles or anything along those lines.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So in Denmark, we have had a message from Michael again. In Denmark, we see a lot of producers foraging botanicals for themselves. Do you see that as an international trend anytime soon?
I mean, it's 100%. It is a trend, and I think it's like an intersection of kind of the interest in the local and the provenance of food and like what people are eating. I think there's an interest in it, and it's a romantic story, and I love foraging. However, I think there's a few caveats to that. Like one, consumers and bartenders also demand predictability in spirits, especially if I'm going to build a cocktail around a craft brand. I expect batch 2 to taste like batch 1 did. And when you're foraging, or when you're exclusively relying on foraged botanicals, right, you kind of have the challenge of seasonality, things that are very much out of your control. The soils were different, the rain was different, the quality of that botanical is different this year, right? So one of my pieces of advice that if you're going to build your spirit around that is making sure that you are in the educational aspect when you do take it to bartenders or take it to consumers, to expect that kind of variation or to embrace that variation. Or more commonly, distillers will forage for some juniper and they're going to blend it a little bit with, some Tuscan juniper that's pretty reliable in terms of its, terpene profile and all of that stuff. So it's a trend, but it's also like a trend that I have seen, fortunately play out not as well for some distillers, just because of the challenges that it introduces into product consistency and the work they have to do in order to kind of, manage up those expectations.
I think gin with a sense of place, using local flavors or locally sourced botanicals, I think has been a big part of what has led to the gin boom and the global embracing of gin from both a distilling and a drinking point of view. So I think it's even more beyond a trend. I just think it's just part of reality now. I think, I don't know really, I was trying to think who was the first person that really got into that kind of stuff. I want to say off the top of my head, it might be someone like Death's Door, which was what, 2007, 2008, 2009, something like that. There may be someone else. But that's like one of the first where I really seem to recall that it was about the sense of place. Everything came from Wisconsin and Illinois, I think is what it was. So, yeah.
There was a large movement, especially like in the Pacific Northwest of the United States. We really saw their foraging culture was already a little bit more mainstream, especially like in restaurants and foodie culture. Therefore, it seemed like very natural, at least here in the States, for that scene to kind of adopt that wholeheartedly. I remember there were brands that were doing it, and they might tell you that they were doing it when you went into the distillery and talked to the distiller, but it wasn't as strong of a part of their brand story, at least back then. They were foraging because it was culturally what they did. It was how they conceived of and thought about these products. Now, if you forage for an ingredient, I think Dave, to your point, it's part of the narrative of place that gin is so uniquely positioned to tell. So if you are foraging, right, put it out there in the front. Like I said, it's romantic. People are really into it. And I love the story, and it tells you like what's out there behind the distillery. Like, what is it actually like in a place I've never been? And it really invites you to storytell.
Yeah. That bit about place that you've never been, and I think that's something that's been very well done by a lot of Australian distillers, some Japanese as well. I see that with, and of course down in South Africa, the Fine Boss.
Yep.
Another good, but other people are doing it as well. But they're three places where you see it done quite a lot as well.
Yeah.
Good. Next question, please.
Yeah. So we're running a bit low on questions. So if anyone has got any, please fire them through to us. So we got one from Sarah Miller, Gin Ding Ding. With so much growth in low ABV hard seltzers and 0% spirits, will full ABV or Navy strength suffer?
No. People always want a proper drink.
I think the short answer is really just about the context that Navy strength was always designed to address, which was mixing cocktails at a bar and still being able to kind of taste the gin while not needing to make it an extraordinarily gin-focused spirit, being able to taste the botanicals when in context next to other bold flavored ingredients. I think that need is still there. I don't think it'll suffer, because I think that most of the most of the audience for Navy strength and upper ABV spirits still is kind of like that bartender community, and I think that audience will still exist.
Yeah. Julia, got any questions for us? Sure, Julia's got some questions. I think there was a question in the Google sheet, Joe.
There is a question in the Google sheet, and I've set up a poll. I'm going to fire the poll out. It's glitter and gin. Yes, God no. Or are you indifferent? Aaron, please tell me your thoughts.
I'm sorry, well, so what engine?
Glitter. So is it a yes, is it a God no, or is it I'm indifferent?
You know, I mean,
I want to add to it. What about gold in gin as well? Gold.
You know, I mean,
glitter / gold leaf and shimmer. You'd include
and
shimmer.
And shimmer. Yeah.
Right. I mean, I've had some good gins with the gold shimmer in it, like Mirari Celebration gin from South Africa might be my favorite one that has the gold leaf in it. I mean, here's the thing, like, you know what? A lot of drinking, a lot of this consumption is social and meant to be enjoyable. And if people are, enjoying it, like I'm not, I don't mind people enjoying their lives and having a good time or appreciating some novelty. Personally, yeah, it's a bit of a gimmick that doesn't add anything. I don't really love drinking, a gold, but it's, if your goal is to do something like that, to just kind of put on a show. I mean, it's like the butterfly pea gin. Does it really add a whole lot to the flavor? No, not really. Is the color change less dramatic than it looks like on Instagram? Oh yeah, it's very subtle, but people are enjoying it. They're having a good time, and I'm not out to begrudge it. If you make a quality spirit and you do everything right, it's really about that. And if there happens to be glitter in it, I'm not gonna say I won't drink it because there's glitter in it. For the most part, it's when I think poor of glitter in gold spirits, it's because the quality of the liquid inside has just been underwhelming, or it's been super sweet, or it just hasn't had enough juniper, any botanical character, right? Like those are the things that disappoint me, not glitter in gold. But you don't really need it if you make a good spirit.
So what about things that are a little bit different to that, Aaron? So green ants, for example, or something that's a little bit different?
Well, I mean, green ants are actually a really great example of something that looks like a gimmick from the outside. But so when you try one of these green ant gins, there's a couple of them being made in Australia, and there is a species of ant that historically the first peoples of Australia would lick them literally for, lick their butts because they have a lemon lime flavor. Lemon lime, in our words, they didn't have lemons and limes in the same way. They didn't call it that. But the point is, it has a really interesting, unique, distinctive, and good flavor. It's not just a gimmick when they're put in gin. It adds something unique. It adds something of a place. And if most importantly, tastes, good. So, and that's where I'm like, yeah, the glitter feels like a gimmick, but ultimately get me to the liquid inside the bottle. And if the liquid is of high quality, I'm willing to forgive a little bit of showmanship.
So the results, I'm going to show them out there and publish them. They are a resounding 88% God no, 1% or 11% indifferent, and a 0% yes. So
can you give them the choices, like if the liquid is good?
I mean, I think I totally agree with that. If the liquid's good, it can be. I mean, you've got to question how much metal you want to drink.
Right.
It does build up in the system. So you've got to watch out for that. But yeah, it's festive. It's a little decadent. It can be quite fun. And like you said, it's part of the visual experience. I totally agree, though. The most important thing is the spirit, a good quality. There is I remember doing a judging with a distiller friend of ours. Doesn't live too far away from you, Aaron. And, we had a gin that had gold flakes in it, and I filtered out the gold flakes. I didn't filter it out. I just it settled, and I poured and left the gold in the bottom. And it was his favorite one. And I said to him, this was the one that it was. He said, oh, if I'd known it had gold flakes in it. I was like, but no, the liquid was really good. And that's why you thought it was good. But going back to your other issue about the color changing thing, and I'm going to be a little bit controversial here.
All right.
And I will put my hands up and change my mind if demonstrated. Most of the color changing gins I've had do not have a lot of flavor. And I wonder if that's because if you have too much botanical oil, it will upset the color changing thing. So unlike glitter and gold, personally, I think that in some cases, in some of the instances I've tasted, the fact that it's color changing, I think puts a limitation on what the flavors can be in terms of the intensity. And I personally don't think that that's a great thing. I would rather have a good tasting color changing. So I'd rather have a good normal gin that tastes good, was good quality, than have a color changing one that was okay. That would be my preference.
I mean, and I'm 100% with you, and I do believe that you're right on that there is some sort of chemical interaction that requires you to have a lower flavor gin in order to get that effect. So if you've never had butterfly pea before it became a gin trend, it's a tea, and the tea exhibits the similar kind of color changing trope. So my thought on this, like where we're going to go in the future of this, if this continues to remain a trend, like I could see, what about syrups or something that kind of add a little bit of that butterfly pea, and maybe syrups which might kind of, so like a gin that sits alongside a syrup, you put the syrup in. I haven't ever done this. I am just product ideating right here. But I mean, maybe separating the two might be the best path forward for it. But I mean, I also have witnessed the disappointment with the color changing effect is common. You don't have to look far on social media to be like, oh, that's it. Did it really change color? So this fad might be on its way out.
I don't know if you remember, Aaron, one of the weirdest color changing gins I tasted, which was an orange gin, and it was an orange flavored gin, and that changed. I had it as part of a judging. Actually, it was a weird thing, and it changed color when you spat it out. It was very bizarre.
Did you ever figure out what was the reaction that was occurring there?
No, we think it was something to do because I just had some water and the water was slightly acidic, and that might have been what it was. But it was proper weird. It's an aside for everybody.
So Julia's just said there's two very intense gin with butterpea flower in Germany.
Oh, very good. Oh, Jules, can you bring some over next time, please?
Tony said we can only hope that creative flair and excellent quality will always be welcome and command the high prices. I don't think you can disagree with that.
Not at all.
No.
Good job, Tony.
Got another question here. So we've got, what do you think the perfect size for a craft gin to be consumed at home is? 0.5 litres or less or more?
Ooh, like that question. One of the things, I guess it depends on what the price point is to me. So one of the things, I haven't got a very good term for it, but it's like the offering price. So it's kind of like, what do I have to pay so I can try it? And then if I don't like it, this is the cost of me buying it. So like if you have like a gin that is going to work out at £50 or something for 70 centilitres, you might be better off going down to 50. So then it's more like 30, 35, because the risk of buying something, particularly if you've not tried it before, of that's like 50 or 60 pounds for a big bottle versus one that's a little bit less money, and then so that's for the risk is less. I think that makes sense to me, and so I would rather have the lower risk. So it partly depends on that sort of price point. I know a lot of people have had some very good response to having 200 ml gins, maybe a full size gin as well, but also having it available in 200 or 100 as opposed to doing the miniatures. I know a few people have had good reactions to that. And if you've got 2 or 3 gins in your range, you can possibly package those as a little gift set. Also, with some of these slightly smaller bottles, you might get a slightly better margin on them. So I guess probably what I'm saying is for the off trade, for the home consumer, probably I'd err on the smaller side. Now, when you get into the bars, that's a slightly different matter, and there's issues about that, and I think probably they might be more inclined to the slightly larger size. So it's kind of depending on a little bit about what your prices are, and thus your margins, and where you're kind of focused towards. Certainly, if you were doing something that was a more exclusive, limited edition kind of thing, I would go for a smaller bottle. And actually, you often see that, most of these gins that are kind of sort of 70, 80 pounds a bottle, something like a Crossbill 200 or something like that. That will be in a smaller bottle, because otherwise it will be over 100 pounds a bottle. And I think that's better. It's limited. There's more of them. It goes further.
Yeah, and I think, to counter this with a little bit of I think Dave, all really great points. I think one of the interesting things is, let's talk about like the consumer behavior and kind of the market you're going into. Right now, a lot of the craft gin space, like people who are willing to try something new, sight unseen, is being driven by this culture of try, buy, and that's pretty much like, you're not really looking at people who are brand loyal. They're looking for novelty. They're looking for unique experiences. And a lot of them, the truth of the matter is, like, these consumers are probably the max you're going to sell to them is going to be one bottle, right? So let's look at the economics of it. Is if you do make a smaller bottle, they will try that in order to, try as many gins as possible and talk about, how they've had like 1,000 gins, which there's nothing wrong with that. But just acknowledging kind of like the tension of releasing these smaller sizes, just because there is a culture of trying many things, not trying a few things, and choosing kind of what I want to make my, house pour. So making it smaller, more affordable obviously makes it easier to tap into that. But if they were going to try anyway, might you be, selling yourself out of, additional sales or additional return on investment? That's possible. So I think that's, and I think that's a tough thing right now to acknowledge, at least the space with so many offerings in the market being so wide with so many options, that this is a large driver of the expansion of the gin market at the moment. And we really haven't seen a change from this wide trying to kind of forming brand affinities, stable brand affinities, that if it's your brand, obviously help drive your brand and support you in the long term.
Yeah. Okay, so we've got a couple more questions, and there's two that kind of probably lead hand in hand. This one's probably quite good for you, Aaron. So do you have any data on how many consumers buy the same product twice? And and then there's another question which says, is lack of brand loyalty the biggest trend changer? So you can
right now I will say that, and this probably won't surprise you, the gin consumers who are brand loyal and who often buy the same bottle time and time again tend to skew older. We're seeing that much more common in the 45 and up. And especially, when we start to look at like consumers who are 65 and older, many of them do have established brand loyalties and don't deviate whatsoever. When some of the in that group, a lot of the new gins they try are often provided via gifts. I know you like Beefeater, so I bought you this, this new local thing. With younger consumers, you do not see as much of that. You don't see very much brand loyalty. Now, granted, you do see certain brands do get purchased multiple times, right? Like, if you're having a holiday, you see like I'll have Hendrix, or something like that in stock because my family knows that. But brand loyalty is less. Yes, it's a real big challenge if you're a distiller trying to break into the space. It's a real big opportunity if you're a distiller trying to create a bunch of different offerings, but it does kind of, it's a complication if you're really looking at a distillery as like a 10, 25 year operation, and how do you build that baseline? It's much harder to build that baseline right now. That being said, I don't have any data right now to suggest that those 35 and under consumers who are trying multiple products, who are more of a try one of every new thing, I don't have any data to say that they will be like that forever, or that they, maybe one day they will form a brand affinity. Maybe they won't. I think this younger audience's spirits drinking habits in general are, only now just being formed. I don't really have I wish I could give you a better answer on the future right now, but if you're looking for brand affinity and long-term lifelong buyers, if you can win over some of your older customers, they seem to be more receptive to that. But like everything, there's a lot of dangerous generalizations in here, but it's a big challenge.
I think the big the sort of last 10, 15 years, the number of big trends. One is the reduction of brand loyalty for sure. One is the increase and significant increase in in the price that consumers are prepared to pay for a bottle of gin, whether that's a 50 or a 70. Like, it used to be capped at sort of $22, 22 pounds, which would be something like Tanqueray 10 or Hendrix. Back in 2005, 15 years ago, maybe. Now, I think the average price is probably of a new gin coming out, it's probably about 30, 35 pounds, something like that. So that's one thing. I also think far more people are collecting gin or just have a wider range of gin. So they have their gin for best, and they might have, 10 or so different gins. So in some ways, the fact that there isn't that brand loyalty, that means that they're open to having a wider selection of stuff. And I think, as you said, maybe a couple of different expressions from the same distillery. And that's very much something that I've seen a little bit more of this year, is people wanting to focus a bit more on having some limited editions, having something new to keep those people that are quite they are fans of the gin and the gin brand and the distillery, to keep them engaged so they can try something new. And quite often they might just be sold at the distillery or on their website, or maybe one retailer or something like that, but it's much more limited. And I think we will continue to see that. It's smart. I think it's a smart move. People you can go too far. You can start releasing stuff every month, and that's tricky if you want to do that. I think some of these subscription services, like the Sipping Society from Sipsmith, and I know Peter Mulryan does one for Blackwater, and a couple of other people do as well. I think Adnams have done one. That's quite a nice idea. And then you can kind of see what's popular, and then that can be a fully fledged product, maybe.
Right. I mean, using those kind of services where you do make multiple offerings and have people try it is a really great way of informalizing your product testing, which I think is, in this crowded market space is, the one piece of advice I give every distiller is you have the people, have an audience in mind, have people try your spirit and listen to their honest feedback. Better yet, if you're the distiller, have one of your staff do it. Don't be there looking at them like I worked 100 hours on making this right here. Have someone else just out there yep, I'm just the bartender, I didn't make the spirit. What do you really think about it? That kind of feedback is going to be, I find distillers that do that are more likely to have a successful product, and it's really the best way forward. And having a good idea isn't, that's a trend on the distiller side. Having a good idea or a hunch isn't really good enough anymore when you're really trying to carve out a small slice of a very crowded market space. So have people taste, and honestly listen to them. If people tell you it sucks, take your lumps and work from there, right? I think they say in writing and art, you got to kill your darlings sometimes, but that's the difference between are you an artist as a distiller, or do you want to have are you a product designer? They're very different. They're different operations. They're both valuable. They're just very different approaches.
So Sarah said batch innovation is another one, which is probably fall along those same lines as.
Oh, batch. Yes. Good call.
Okay, so sorry, another question here. What other previous trends do you think or are on the way out?
I mean, there's one really interesting one that has changed so much in the last 24 months, and it's gonna involve Snoop Dogg at the end of the story right here. Pink gin, huge fad. We all, especially, less so in the States. We didn't see as much of it, but it was, it really had its moment in the UK and European markets, right? Well, this is what I think is really interesting about it, is because the bright neon pink, the over sweetening, some of these spirits, I think, one, they identified a gap in the gin market, which was there's a really healthy appetite for these kind of floral, fruit forward spirits, maybe even appealing to flavored vodka loyalists. There was an appetite for this and an interest for it. But where I think Snoop Dogg's gin comes in Doggo, he's not with Tanqueray, he's not with Hendrix anymore. He's onto his own thing. But what I really like about what he's done is that what him and the branding company have done is, so they've taken everything about pink gin, that kind of the flavor. So it has the strawberry essence added after distillation. So you still have that flavor. It still appeals to that market, but they've done away with it's not sweetened after distillation. And two, it's not neon pink, it's clear, right? So it looks, it's pink gin is growing up and it's on our shelves. It's just in a different format than we're used to. So it's not going away, but it's not here in the same way it was 2 years ago. And I think this is where I kind of see us going, is that this will be a category of the gin space that will continue to endure, but it won't look like it did a couple years ago.
It's interesting because it's kind of like a full circle, because if you look at something like Brockman's, that kind of occupies a similar sort of space, but that's been around for a very long time. I don't know if it's 10 years yet, but it must be getting close to it. And so, it's interesting to have that kind of full circle. I think thankfully we have seen the end of like some nonsense clickbait news story where someone's like, oh, someone's made a gin and it tastes like Tutti Frutti, or someone's made a gin and it tastes like, oh, Hubba Bubba bubble gum or something. And it's just like some dirt cheap, like stuff, bit of flavor in, and it's just like, just roll it out. And it's all like, it's really, really sweet. And there's no like real thought gone into it.
And it's probably less than the allocated 37.5% as well, isn't it? So
usually would be, yeah. And I think you're starting to see a move away from that sort of detritus to quality. Jaffa Cake gin being a good example. It's a similar kind of idea, but they've actually gone in like, how can we distill Jaffa Cakes? How can we get these flavors in there? Because it's a flavor people like, chocolate and orange, brilliant, right? But how do we do it in a better way, in a way where there's actually some quality there?
Yeah, see, that's one of the gins that I am most disappointed about our reduced cross-Atlantic travel, because I desperately want to try that one.
Jaffa Cake
you love a Jaffa Cake as well.
But with the gin, you sort of, it's probably more accessible to the consumers, isn't it? That's just what certain consumers. And then now, I've seen a bit of a trend moving away from tonic. I go to a lot of bars. A lot of people there sort of going, I want a pink gin and lemonade, I want a gin and lemonade. They may see that as a more accessible option to them, a sweeter option. I mean, for me, a pink gin probably would be too sweet even with tonic. So lemonade would not work for me. But a pink gin and lemonade it seems to be quite common in bars now. And the lemonade in general going with gin, which it probably wasn't 3 or 4 years ago. It wasn't, you weren't hearing that. Gin was on the rise in a standard way, but without the lemonade potentially.
Well, lemonade and gin, I think, is one of the most interesting stories in this, because for a long time, lemonade and gin was extraordinarily popular in the off trade. It was the kind of thing you would see like people drinking in backyards, like in Pinterest, you'd see kind of people, young mothers, like would be throwing these parties for their, 2 or 3 year old, which of course had cocktails, because the 2 or 3 year olds aren't old enough to really, partake, but you got to entertain the friends, right? And they'd be doing these very elaborate, like, beautifully decorated cocktails. I mean, that's what Pinterest was, was about on some level. But I mean, like gin and lemonade has been this very common off trade, I don't want to say invisible, but like, to the bar scene where, to bartenders and kind of like the very high class cultural moment gin was having for a while. We were talking about like Prohibition era cocktails. We were kind of ignoring the ways that a lot of people were enjoying gin just because we didn't see them in bars for a long time. And I think this is one of the things that honestly spurred why I started doing this consumer report on research, was because on gin preference. I know, uncatchy name, it'll be changed next year. But the reason I started doing it was because I realized that, my audience, through my site and my work wasn't just bartenders. It wasn't just, there was, I had an immense amount of people, who were enjoying gin and doing so in ways we didn't expect. So I really wanted to kind of help bring that to distillers who are looking for market opportunities and looking for, product development opportunities, and bring these voices into the world, because gin and lemonade, it's also delicious. I like it, but I wouldn't know. Pink gin and lemonade, not my jam.
The other trend I hope is gone is this nonsense of trying to make the strongest gin you possibly can, which I think is just ludicrous. It's irresponsible, just absolute nonsense. So I'm hoping there was a little spate of like doing it. And I'm sure that, and the distilleries that do it, they make very good stuff. They don't need to indulge in this gimmick. And the idea that it saves water is possibly one of the stupidest things I've ever heard. Just on that gimmick, like the distilleries, the other gins they make, great. But just on this one thing, just pack it in. Can we just move away from it? It's not responsible. It's stupid. Let it die.
I've got one more question for you, and then we'll probably have to wrap it there. So, our very own Bernadette Hampton, have there been any unusual trends that surprised you in the last year?
The increase in popularity of gin and coke has generally surprised me. I think it's been bubbling away underneath. I don't want to get, because we spoke about it for a long time, but and I've been talking about it for a while. But then actually, genuinely, to see other people talking to me about it, and they go, "Oh, have you noticed a trend in this?" I'm like, "It's very interesting." So that's probably the biggest thing that surprised me.
Yeah, I'm a little surprised at the momentum that was kind of halted in a lot of the low and no ABV stuff. Like I said, though, I kind of want to wait to look at the data. I'm surprised, though, that it trailed off so precipitously. I think the other one is just kind of like an enduring surprise, which is really just the immense popularity of floral gins with the under 35 set, and especially like that, we for the generalizations we sometimes make about like men, like they citrus forward gins have such a loyal following. Like that is a big driver with that set, especially the under 35. And I think that so like those are kind of like macro trends in flavor that I find surprising, but hopefully we're not finding them as surprising anymore going forward.
And just very quickly to add on to what you've just said, I think that's maybe another trend that we're seeing is a more informed consumer. This rise of this kind of new group of what I describe as the super fans, the gin super fans, who are more informed and are looking for limited editions, and actually is a demographic as a group of people well worth courting by craft distillers, because they are happy to pay money for more interesting gins and with a and a decent premium on them. But also how we talk about flavor, I think, is changing a little bit. Like gin used to just be gin, right? And had like Gordon's, it's a bit citrusy, and then you had Beefy that was a bit more orangey, and you had Tanqueray and Bombay Sapphire and Plymouth had a bit of spice. It wasn't much. Now it does seem like flavor is being a much more important aspect of things, and also in how it's communicated. Warner's, I think, is a great example, where they'll have like 2 or 3 words that describe the gin, luscious and fruity or something like that, crisp and bright on the front of the label. And I think that's really good, but it's needed with all this gin out there. You need to be able to differentiate with it as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think like Tinkerman Stateside, like their recent gin launches, I think this is a very positive trend, which is, does your consumer know what distilled lavender tastes like? No, and it depends on what you do to it, what it tastes like, right? But consumers do know and understand these broad flavor terms. So yeah, talking about botanicals, like we said earlier, the story is still important, but ultimately when you're trying to communicate what it tastes like, we're really seeing a lot of distillers embrace, yeah, my gin tastes fruity, floral, citrus forward with a little bit of spice on, like that kind of language, and maybe I'm biased because like this is a big thing I found in my research, but like this kind of language communicates to a consumer where they are with no other knowledge. And I think this is a trend I've really seen, just the last 18 months. And I think it really does bode well for where gin is going if we keep doing that.
Yeah, and a shout out to Percy as well, because Percy Distillery up in Scotland. Simon, if you're watching, you've been doing it since you started, so great job.
Right. I think that's everything. It's all our questions. And so thank you very much for everyone for watching. And David and Aaron, thank you.
And we're going to be talking about spirits competitions next. So we're talking if you want to talk and find out why do certain things win and all this stuff, that's coming up at 5 o'clock.
All right.
Very
Cheers.
Much.